I want to talk a little bit today about sort of where agents are going. There are a lot of people talking about harnesses these days. Hopefully you've heard some of that. We're going to dive into that as well. We're going to talk about where we are, where we've been, and where we're going. So a bit about me. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Mastra. Before this, I was the co-founder of Gatsby, so I've been doing open source, JavaScript, TypeScript frameworks for a while now. If you were around back then, Mastra is a lot of the team from Gatsby. We work closely with a lot of other great solutions for agents like Copilot Kit. We have raised our Series A recently from Spark. We were also YC. We have been around for about 20 months. A lot of folks are using us in production across the enterprise, across sort of scaled startups. People are doing enterprise search, which these days is getting known as company brain, but everything has different names. Agentifying kind of business processes, scale up doing chatbots, developer platform stuff like AI SREs, a bunch of stuff like really, really cool kind of like use cases. We are now in what I like to call the harness era, which is that since sort of Claude Code started taking off a few months back, we are now in this new era where we have a lot of code and other things being done in this kind of long-running agent cycle. And there's various form factors. There's cloud versions of that. There's local versions of that. There's sort of framework versions of that, right? And we're one of the framework options for building a harness. A year ago I was talking at AI Engineer and it was about like agents or workflows. Why not both? And now we're talking about harnesses. So how do all these things relate to each other? Well, I kind of see this as an agentic spectrum. And what I mean by that is that, on the journey from just starting with the model all the way up to, call it Claw, your OpenClaw, your Hermes agent. There's a few different steps, and there's kind of qualities that the applications that we build along the way gather as you add sort of more and more features to them. And, that's kind of also shaped, the reason we care is that it's shaped a lot of the primitives that we've shipped to help, users that are building these agents and harnesses and claws on top. Okay, let's just rewind back to 2025 for a little bit, just so we can kind of like set the stage and talk about what makes what's the difference between an LLM and an agent. Well, we all know about the agent loop. We know about tool calling. We know about memory. Retrying failed tasks. Dex is kind of like context engineering that came out July, August of 2025, if memory serves me right. Agents being able to store state. But all these were things that, well, hey, I have this thing running in a loop. It's not just doing like a single shot transformation of some text or some classification type thing. It's really maybe some kind of conversational assistant that I can talk to within, a SaaS app, maybe locally on my computer. It's a little bit more than just, hey, I did an API call to Anthropic or OpenAI. Great. So, now we have agents running in loops, again, this is like versus an LLM. What's the difference then, the next step when we moved sort of like from that type of an agent to like a Claude Code type harness? Well, there's a lot of things. And I think like if we think about, using Claude Code, about using Codex, what are the things that make that, a great experience? Well, okay, so, planning mode, it kind of gives you, hey, I'm going to do these 5 steps. And then you can see it, doing step 1 and then it does step 2. It shows you what they are. It kind of checks them off, right? Parallel sub-agents, so hey, I'm going to have, and these have clean context windows, right? So yeah, I'm going to go research this topic with this sub-agent. I'm going to research this topic with this sub-agent. It's going to get some bindings. It's going to like feed it back into the main thread. We have better ways of driving it, right? This the 2E interface / commands, this kind of thing. Skills, obviously. Dynamic subagents where you're not just sort of defining the subagents up front, but maybe it just kind of gets created on the fly. You can spin up these background bash tasks. When your context window gets full, it sort of auto-compacts. Threads can persist, so you can kind of resume them. Sometimes you might just persist it to disk. Not just chatting, right? But so it's not just like, hey, I have to wait for the LLM's turn, because like an agent, a lot of times it's like the LLM's taking a turn, then I'm taking a turn. The LLM's taking a turn, I'm taking a turn. Well, Claude Code's a little different, right? You can queue, you can steer, you can interrupt. There are these like different sort of affordances there. And then, more finely grained permissions around tool approval. Hey, I can approve this type of command for the whole session, or I can approve it once. Then there's this sort of like, if you think about, right, what's the difference between like a Claude Code and let's say a Devin, if you've used Devin, or so Devin lives in Slack, right? So it's kind of inherently multiplayer. You can have multiple people talking to it. It also has kind of like a web UI, right, where you can sort of like have the thread branch off there. A lot of harnesses that are sort of cloud first also have like support mobile apps. Sometimes these mobile apps like tunnel into your local host, right? That's a feature that's we're seeing more and more because they tend to be cloud based. They often provision these cloud sandboxes because they're cloud based. They can do more parallelism. You can really only do so many like parallel processes on your machine, or want to do so many parallel processes on your machine, but you can do more in the cloud. This always happens with distributed computing. We spent a lot of time thinking about this last time at Gatsby as well. Just think about like the difference between running a build locally on your machine versus running one in the cloud, right? You can just do more things in the cloud to maybe parallelize things. And it's the same, when you're running an agent, right? And then instead of maybe creating a separate branch or work tree on your machine, maybe it's just creating a PR and pushing it to GitHub. So, when we kind of like group these things together, I just think about this as like always on. It's not like you don't have to hold your laptop, open, right? As you like walk to and from things, you can just kind of like spin it up and let it go, right? And so, even within like the sort of the harness era, there's sort of a difference in a form factor between local and cloud. And again, I think this is always the case in dev tools, right? You have local and cloud versions of stuff. What's the difference between a Next.js dev server running locally and a build preview on render, right? It's like they're kind of the same thing, right? Or Vercel or whatever, right? Like they're kind of the same thing, but one is just the local version and one is the cloud version. Cool. So now great. Now what's the difference between sort of this type of harness and the kind of the claw paradigm? Well, there's a few things. So one is sort of it gets called heartbeat. It gets called schedules. It gets called crons, right? But you can schedule like recurring tasks, and often you'll schedule these things to kind of wake up, let's say every 30 minutes, and kind of like check things for you, which kind of ties into the next thing down there, which is subscriptions. So if any of you have used one of the personal assistant agents, for example, a lot of them will sort of be subscribed to your emails. They'll be like texting you, hey, I see you have like an urgent email. Do you want to like respond to it, right? They persist memory, often in the cloud. They often have like a gateway. They have channels. You can Slack them. You can send them messages on Telegram. You can WhatsApp them. You can iMessage them. And then increasingly we're starting to see this continual learning, right? So they will create their own skills, or they will given a skill, they'll look at what you're doing and then they'll refine that skill, right? So they get better at doing a task over time, which has actually been something we've been hoping for a while. Now we're starting to see claws do this. I call this Steinberger's law, which is that like every harness will expand until it becomes a claw. And it expands because we, as in its users, we want it to expand. Like we really like if something is useful, we really just like want to like. It should be easier to talk to it. We want to text it. We want it to run overnight, right? Like a lot of these things are like very long running. We want our own kind of like dopamine casino where we put in tokens and get out like whatever kind of output, right? Whether that's code, whether that's like whatever it is, whatever it's producing for us. And I think I want to just think about, if you're building an agent, if you're building a harness, if you're building a claw, think about your user requests that you get. As like, you may see your users asking you for many of these things. Hey, can you can you maybe do more? Can you do more faster? Can you, spin up multiple research tasks? Or like, what if you could just do a bunch, research 20 things at once instead of like 3 things at once? Like your users will ask you for these kinds of things. And I think it's important when you're listening to those kinds of requests, just to be able to like mentally bucket, okay, cool, they're wanting my agent to become a harness, right? As a framework, vendor, I'm, selfishly incentivized to tell you that, it's actually kind of easier for you if you use a framework that gives you a lot of this stuff, rather than having to roll every single one of these features yourself. Because then, we just see a lot of teams that are kind of like, hey, do I want to like roll this new feature, or do I want to like roll something that's like user facing? And it's kind of just nice if you have a framework that handles that stuff for you. But I do want to like kind of close with, as our agents expand to harnesses, as our harnesses expand to claws, we should keep in mind that realistically most of our users only have space for so many claws in their life. So many things that are like awake all the time, that like subscribe to, notifications and like text them and Slack them. And I think it's like somewhat similar to like the apps that we use on our phone. We have like different categories of apps. But there are only like one or two apps in every category. How many ride-sharing apps really made it? How many Maps apps made it? How many food delivery apps made it? And it's partially this is like there are other things going on, but partially it's just that users only have space for so many of these things in their brain. So just keep in mind that like you're going to be competing for mind space. If you're building something that's like very engaging for your users, you're going to be competing for mind space with the other things that are also competing to be engaging. Do with that what you will. Yeah, every harness will become a claw. I'm Sam Bhagwat, founder CEO of Mastra. Great to meet y'all, and hope we get to chat.